G'day YouTube. Warbles on a lot here at my southwest boundary. I thought I'd like to make part 2 to my clip AmeriKan gun cult. Whereas in part 1 we sort of looked at the nature of the problem, the way there's a complex emotional, psychological, ego-driven fascination that anxious people have for firearms, for ballistic pellet projectors. The idea that everything in their landscape threatens them and they would like to be able to theoretically poke holes in everything that they can see. And we looked at the idea that in the United States of Norte Americano, it's a very deeply venerated ancestral tradition that when the white Euro peons from Europe come, landless ignorant peasant who's got a bigger gun, they needed to defend themselves from wild animals and from wild Indians who disputed their manifest destiny to own the continent of North America. Later on, the Americans decided it was necessary that the citizen population maintained arms so that if the federal or the state government became thoroughly obnoxious and objectionable, the citizenry could rise up and do something like the Arab Spring or perhaps the Syrian Rebellion. And as recently as last week, I heard a spokesperson from the American National Rifle Association say that the 3 main reasons for owning a firearm was their constitutional right to bear arms. It was also hunting, but mainly it was self-defence. And I gave them to you in his reverse order. Self-defence was his prime consideration. Now, in America, there's supposed to be 1 gun per person. But this does not mean that every American has a gun. Apparently, 3 out of 4 Americans do not own a firearm at all. 3 out of 4 Americans feel perfectly safe to live their lives with no firearm in reach or hanging up in the house or locked up under the bed. They don't have a gun. 1 in 4 Americans apparently feels a need for an average of 4 guns. Now, when I was in my hunting, shooting, fishing phase, I was living on 1,500 acres and I was 5 miles from the nearest farmhouse and I was a meat eater. And I had 7 or 9 guns hanging on the wall at one point in time. So I understand that the person who's got the fascination for a gun to the point where they actually get one, they're going to have more than one. But the people who've got guns, they feel that they individually, personally, are perfectly safe with their weapon, and it's disingenuous of them to not grasp the point that every other person who owns a firearm feels the same. Because each one of those people who's got a firearm and thinks themselves safe, they all absolutely accept the assumption without question that out there in the wide world there exist people who are in possession of firearms and they are unsafe and they are predatory and they have evil, malicious intent. The people who own firearms for self-defence assume they live in a predatory universe. So I suspect they suffered an anxiety-riddled toddlerhood. I suspect they have overdeveloped right-sided amygdalae with extra neural circuits for being anxious and startled with, and for imagining threats where none exist. Whereas perhaps the 3 people out of 4 in America who don't have a firearm because they can't see the need, perhaps they had plenty of love and cuddles in their first 3 years and therefore they don't have an overdeveloped right amygdala and they have extra circuits in the anterior cingulate gyrus on the left side which is, that's error detection. That's where the human brain notices things that are wrong. So when somebody who had plenty of love and cuddle sees a John Wayne movie where a man's got to do what a man's got to do, and that's why Sylvester Stallone runs around with machine guns in a shoulder holster, the person who's had plenty of love and cuddles looks at that and says, yeah, what a joke, how could you possibly try and live your life like that? The person who has not had enough love and cuddles as an infant looks at that and thinks, gee, what a great idea, if only I had 2 of them shoulder holsters, you know, I could walk armed to the toilet. And that kind of brings me on to the subject of the underlying culture of the people who think that firearms are going to keep them safe. They've been reading books and magazines and cartoons for over a century and a half, glorifying British Empire and Wild West tales of daring do. And I think that's fairly hard to preach against. If somebody's been soaked in a culture where the person who pulls the biggest gun the fastest and shoots the most often is the one who wins the day, gets the girl and the money, and sets off into the sunset and lives happily ever afterwards. I think, as well as anything else that's done in terms of banning specific kinds of firearms, I think it would be a really good idea if there was a federal government injection of funding into Hollywood script writing and movie making and even cartoon drawing, so that all the cartoons, sitcoms, rom-coms and feature films for the next 10 years at least have at least one character, possibly 2 or 3, depending on the species of movie, where the character is insecure, anxious, overcompensated, aggressive, anally retentive, and they like polishing guns and seeing the world in terms of potential targets and things that need to be shot at, possibly. And if these people could fairly regularly drop their gun and shoot themselves in the leg, or accidentally shoot their kid or their wife or their brother or their husband while they're cleaning their gun, or perhaps mistake the neighbour for a burglar in the middle of the night, and if the movie portrayal of the use of guns in society could more accurately reflect the experience. And the experience of guns in society is that, let's have a look at a ground orchid. The experience of guns in society is that in America they have 100,000 gun deaths per year, and in Australia we have somewhere between 350 and 500. And that's homicides and accidents. Don't know where suicides fit into that in the Australian figures. In the American figures, the suicides are included in the all-gun deaths. Back in the 1980s, when I was particularly interested, because I was still a gun owner, I discovered that, I think it was 1987, there were 13,650 handgun deaths in the United States of America. 13,000. That year I don't think Australia had 12 handgun deaths, because handguns had already been heavily restricted in Australia. But back in those days we did used to have semi-automatic long arms available. You could have a semi-automatic shotgun, you could have a pump action shotgun with a 15-shot magazine. I personally had a Springfield Model 98, that's 1898, and it was one of the first semi-automatics, blowback 22. It was a target rifle, it was my grandfather's. It was the gun my grandfather kept in his bedroom so that if ever he got taken really sick he could shoot himself. And he was found stretched out on the floor after having had a stroke trying to get to his gun. Couldn't get there, he wound up in hospital, and it took him months to die slowly from the toes up, the way it happens when you have a really bad stroke. So that was the gun I was sent to boarding school with, and I was rifle team captain with a semi-automatic 22 target rifle. And during the middle 1980s, I went through a phase where I'd had to surrender my gun licence for a bit of a problem the time I nearly shot myself with my grandfather's pea rifle. But I'd got my gun licence back, and I went through a various collection of firearms. I'd get good with one and then I'd sell it and get another one, and played around there for a while, living on 1,500 acres. And a bloke went to Strathfield Shopping Centre and he took a gun called an SKS. And I had an SKS, I knew what they were like. Terribly inaccurate with the ex-military ammunition, which is designed to go in one side of you and out the other side and not actually kill you. Designed to wound under the Geneva Convention of 1901, 3, 5, 7, 11 and whatever. And they make hunting ammunition for it, but the hunting ammunition has a soft nose on the projectile which is deformed by the loading ramp. Oh, you've just had a fly on the lens. Go away. And the violent action of the military loading ramp means that whereas the military ammo will go almost straight, costs about 12 cents a shot, the hunting ammo flies in an ever-increasing corkscrew spiral. And it never hits anything that you aim at, but it costs $1.25 a shot. And if you did hit something, it would kill it instantly. So a bloke takes one of these guns with the ex-military ammo, which he could afford to buy, and he takes it to a shopping centre, and he fired 60 rounds. And he killed 7 people, including himself, out of the 15 that he hit, including himself. And he sort of proved my thesis that if you're going to get shot at, a military assault rifle is possibly one of the better guns to get shot at with. However, subsequent events proved that one wrong when people started using American made assault rifles like the AR-15 that Martin Bryant took to Port Arthur. And when Martin Bryant went to Port Arthur with an AR-15, which had been surrendered to the Victorian police in a gun amnesty, our Prime Minister sort of took advantage of the horror and the outrage at, 35 or 37 dead one day because a bored, lonely person decided to, shoot up everybody who wouldn't talk to him. All semi-automatics were declared illegal in Australia, semi-automatic rifles. I had to give up my grandfather's pea rifle, the one that I'd nearly committed suicide with. The one that when I was 18, I spent 5 minutes drunk with a bruised lip in the middle of the night thinking seriously about shooting up a bunch of 5 people who'd, lured me out of town so that they could beat me up because I was a loudmouth smartass. So I've nearly gone off with a gun. I've nearly killed myself with a gun. And I like to think that I'm quite a reasonable person, and when I owned the guns I didn't see myself as being any danger to society, though others may disagree. And recently, one of my American friends who's a firearm fancier, supporter, said that he didn't think I was dangerous with a gun, so taking my gun away from me didn't make the world a safer place. And I disagree strongly. I might have been safe, but I was, a couple of occasions, marginal. There are people out there who are not as sane as I am. They're not as emotionally resilient or as emotionally stable as I am. And if me being allowed to have a gun meant that a whole bunch of people who were potentially more likely than I am to go crackers, if me having a gun meant they had a gun as well, they had to be allowed to have a gun. Whereas if I give my gun up, what do I lose by that? I lose the ability to sit there fantasising enemies I've never met yet, and scenarios where I get to save my life by shooting my way out of trouble. Okay, well I can do without such fantasies and scenarios and mental thought experiments. But by giving up my gun, it means that all such guns are taken out of our society, and I can go to the supermarket and no longer be slightly worried that somebody might just cook off like a piece of popcorn in a saucepan and pull out their semi-automatic and start shooting up the car park while I'm in the car park. Which was getting to be a worry, because it had happened here a couple of times. In Australia, I mean. Well, we don't have that worry anymore. On the other hand, we have different worries. Different worries like, back in the old days, if you got a cranky young man who had lots of shoot up the landscape fantasies, unless they already had some pretty bad stuff on their criminal record, they could go to a gun shop and for $150 they could buy one of those SKS Chinese assault rifles. And like I said, ammo was 12 cents a shot. These things were big, they were clunky, they were heavy. You couldn't put it under your overcoat and take it to a dance. You couldn't go out for a night on the town with your SKS in your back pocket. But if you could get out of town and find a gully, somewhere where you couldn't be seen, you might be able to put up some tin cans and shoot 15 yards across the gully and hit them and have a lot of fun with them. You wouldn't find much wildlife that had come within shooting range, but you could put holes in road signs. That was an SKS. And these people would work it out of their system. And yeah, one or two of them, out of the thousands of SKSs that came into the country, one or two of them were used in mass casualty shootings. Now that the SKS is not there, what's the biggest thing in the gun shop that a clean skin can buy? It's a bolt action hunting rifle designed to take down buffalo or something at a range of 200 or 300 metres with a telescopic sight. So the first kind of mass casualty shooting we had in Australia after Martin Bryant was a bloke called Leonard Leabeater, and he went off his little trolley with a 243 and a scope, and he fired 5 rounds and hit 3 people, and all 3 of them died. Totally different kill ratio. Now when someone goes off with a long arm, they're probably going to hit a lot of people. The other thing is, people who can't get a shooter's licence, and there's a lot more of them now because the regulations have been tightened up, they tend to go looking for an illegal handgun, something which can in fact be carried around all the time, easily hidden under the seat in a car or whatever, if not in the back pocket. And these illegal handguns are causing an increasing rate of shootings in the suburbs. We're talking 5 gunshots on the streets incidents in 48 hours in Sydney, with one fella being executed out the front of his house. So I think you'll find that gun deaths in Australia are on a rise, and it's mainly the illegal handguns, whereas once upon a time there would have been an awful lot of legally owned long arms being used in the occasional rage event or for suicidal purposes. But I really think that as well as taking semi-automatics and magazines over 5 or 10 round capacity, let's face it, how often does a hunter need more than 5 bullets to kill one thing? Taking those out of circulation is about as much legislatively as I think any American administration can expect to achieve as a beginning. The next step, like I said, is pay Hollywood to reflect the reality of firearm ownership, which is that 100,000 Americans are dying every year from guns. And they don't make the world a safer place. It means that the insecure, anxious people have got better tools to kill anybody who annoys them when they have a temper tantrum. There you go, that's what I really think. What do you reckon? Guns do kill people, especially when they're in the hands of paranoid people. Ciao.